First letter to the Corinthians. It be the God and Father of our chapter 1 and verse 3. Fight the good fight. Timothy chapter 6 and verse. And we begin just this evening in our series in the book of Genesis, looking at the lives of Jacob and Esau. And here's such an important passage in the next few chapters, and we'll cover as much ground as we can. And the title that I've given to our study this evening is Cementing the Church and the World. And that's surely the major theme. Election is one thread that runs unmistakably through the chapters. And that, of course, the Apostle Paul in Romans 9 makes that very clear to us, and one of his prime examples of election in action is chosen from this particular these chapters under the inspiration of the Spirit of God. And then we have lessons in faith. We can't touch upon them all. And then we have the example of Isaac, an immensely godly man, a man of whom one serious aberration is recorded, but by and large a godly man, a quiet man, and yet someone who got it into his head that half the blessing which was to be bestowed upon Jacob could go to Esau. And possibly he was very taken by his son Esau because he focused on his excelling in certain worldly, earthly skills. And if you focus on worldly things over much, and we'll see it in Isaac, then your judgment is overthrown in vital respects. And we see here also the thread of the church and the world. You see it all the way through Genesis up till now. Genesis 3:15, the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, those who are the Lord's, those who are by faith in Christ, those who are the lost. They cannot function together in the same church. There must be a separation of the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. And you see, time after time, there is confusion, and the two quite different seed come together. And there's confusion between the church and the world, and then God intervenes and separates them out again. It's one of the great themes of the book of Genesis. There's hardly a chapter that doesn't include reference to this particular theme. And so we're going to be reminded of that once again. So it's about the offspring of Isaac and some of the lessons that can be drawn from this, but I can only deal with a few. Verse 20 of chapter 25. And Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife. We often lose track of Isaac. He lived 180 years. He was 40 years old at his marriage, and they waited, this very chapter tells us so, they waited another 20 years because Isaac was 60 before the twins were born. And you read just a little, I shall go swiftly through this initially. Verse 21, and Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord was entreated of him, but the prayer was maintained for 20 years. And that's a lesson in trust and faith. And then in verse 22, we come to some of we're introduced to a great statement and prophecy. The children struggled together, or jostled, might be better, together within her. And she said, if it be so, why am I thus? A very shallow interpretation would suggest that Rebekah doesn't realize she was expecting. And so this has reference to that. Well, why am I so disturbed within? But that's not the correct interpretation. She sees here that there is something indicated. She knows she's expecting. There's be little doubt about that. But why should there be this struggle, this jostling within the womb? And so she prays to the Lord. What is the significance? What is the message? Why am I thus? Why is this happening? And so she pleads for light, and surely it comes in verse 23, the great statement. And the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb. She prays for a child, she gets 2 nations, as Calvin said so many years ago. 2 distinct nations, 2 different kinds in her womb. I'm reading the book of Genesis, and knowing that this thread runs all the way through, we think instinctively of the church and the world, the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. And sure enough, this is what it turns out to be. 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner, 2 kind of people shall be separated from thy bowels. The children will be so distinct and different from the moment of birth. One will represent the family of God, and the other will represent the children of darkness. And there'll be antagonism from the seed of the serpent to the seed of the woman, all the way through. 2 distinct people. The one people, as it happens, it'll be the seed of the serpent, shall be stronger than the other people. And the elder, the strong, however, shall serve the younger. That's the prophecy. That's the indication that the younger and the weaker of the 2 will be the one who will bear the seed royal, through whom the blessing of Abraham will be extended, who will give rise to the great nation from whom Messiah will come, by whom all the nations of the world will be blessed. Now, clearly, Isaac was told. Isaac knew this. Rebekah knew it. She kept it close to her heart, but it was known within the family. And yet Isaac, godly Isaac, seems to half overturn the statement of God. He doesn't disbelieve it. He certainly doesn't reject it. But he so reasons in his mind that he thinks, evidently, that Esau can still inherit the family, even if Jacob is going to be the one through whom the seed royal will be given, will come eventually. That seems to be the best explanation of why Isaac takes the line in the future that he does, a godly man. Verse 24, and when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were 2 twins in her womb. The first, hairy, Esau, and verse 26, after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel, a most remarkable and a very unusual birth, not the way twins would normally be expected to come. And his name was called Jacob, or the grasper at the heel, or supplanter. And Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them. And look at verse 27. You can see the difference between the nations, the types. It's brought out there. The boys grew. And Esau was a cunning hunter. Esau, says the original, knowing hunting. Our translation, a cunning hunter, a man of the field. Well, we can pause there. That tells us a lot about Esau. He was very much an outdoor man. He lived for challenges and action. He was an adventurer. He was a hunter. He was a free spirit. He liked no restraints, no chains. Probably, in many ways, a good-natured man. Who knows? We're not actually given information along those lines. And Isaac really took to him. In some ways, he had qualities which Isaac lacked. He was full of daring and exploration. He wasn't a responsible man, a man who looked after the establishment at home, who was concerned about provision and family responsibilities. He was an outgoing individual. So Esau was a cunning hunter. The old writers used to say that people who are hunters run the risk of becoming harsh and cruel and heartless. It goes with the work. Whether that's fair and so or not, I don't know. But that was commonly said. And maybe it was true also of Esau. But he knew how to put himself across to Isaac, his father. And he found his way to Isaac's heart through his palate. He would go for game, all varieties of game, I imagine. And so a great range of flavors, tastes, and so on. And this struck a soft spot with Isaac. But I would imagine that speculation on my part that Esau in many other ways also was very careful to cultivate the favor of his father, though that isn't said, I confess, in this passage. Verse 27, and Jacob was a plain man. Well, plain, the Hebrew more has to do with quiet, not adventurous. The opposite of Esau is indicated. Not an outwardly exciting man, not a man who courted danger. He was a quiet man, dwelling in tents. The idea there is to convey, it's not just information about where he lived, it indicates to us that he was responsible. Now he knew, there is no doubt, from his mother of the great prophecy, and he was a believer, that he was to be the one through whom one day the Messiah would come. He was to be the head of the family, under the divine protection. And so he took his responsibilities seriously, and he was concerned as Isaac grew older and older, it would be Jacob who ran the whole camp. Remember, there were nomads. They would settle in a place for a while and then move on. There was an awful lot to be done. There were many, many staff, great flocks and herds, and it would appear to be Jacob who takes the responsibility and focuses and esteems his great privilege to be the one through whom the blessing would ultimately be conveyed. But there was a problem. It was, of course, known within the family that Isaac didn't see it that way. That Isaac's interpretation of the prophecy was that Jacob, yes, God had said it, would be the one through whom the Messiah would come, but Esau was the one he loved, who would be head of the family and would inherit the whole machine, as it were. And that was a sore point. I'm quite sure that Jacob would have interacted with his father about this probably many times. You remember the culture? He was very reverent towards his father, very submissive. If his father raised his hand, the conversation ended there. It was no more discussion. But I would think that Isaac knew that both Rebekah and Jacob did not agree with his scheme that Isaac should be that Esau should be head of the family. And Jacob had tried to get this across to his father Isaac many times. Well, you read now in verse 28 that Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison. You can read much more into that Isaac was very taken by Esau because of all his earthly skills, not just what he was able to provide from the field. That stands for all the earthly skills. It's just an example of them. Isaac wouldn't have been influenced by only one thing, but he admired Esau for his daring and his skill and his achievement. But Rebekah loved Jacob. Say some writers, oh, Jacob was a good boy and did this and did that, and but no, Rebekah loved Jacob rightly. He was the heir. He was the one, the responsible one, the one who valued the arrangement of God. Well, then verse 29, and here is an incident in their lives, and it's so misinterpreted. I must just introduce it to you quickly. We have a lot to get through. And Jacob sod or seethed or boiled pottage. Turns out, we're told a few verses later, it was lentils. And Esau came from the field and he was faint, possibly to the point of exhaustion. And Esau said to Jacob, "Feed me." Or more literally, you could render it, "Let me gulp down. Give it me urgently. Let me gulp this down with that same red pottage, for I am faint." Therefore was his name called Edom. Now what follows is so wildly interpreted. Cunning Jacob, deceitful, sallow, horrible man, plays a ghastly trick on his ravenous brother and chooses to extract from him the birthright, because he's a nasty piece of work and a deceitful and a cunning thing, and he takes advantage of him. Dear friends, that's nonsense. That's sheer nonsense. You cannot possibly interpret the passage that way. Well, you can if you've never read the book of Genesis, if you've not seen the threads, if you've not seen the alarms, if you've not seen the divine commentary. Look at verse 34, the very end. Thus Esau despised his birthright. This is not about a cunning Jacob wresting something out of Esau. This is about the day it was plainly demonstrated that Esau, as an unbeliever, had nothing but contempt for the promise of God and the birth of a Saviour and the coming seed, and he didn't believe all that, and he had no time for it. And in this event, this is most profound, it all comes out. Let me give you a different look at this. By the way, Jacob didn't need to buy the birthright from Esau. It belonged to Jacob. You can't buy what is yours. Esau had no right to sell it. It wasn't his. It was already Jacob's. So what is going on here? What is going on is a demonstration. Jacob just cannot bear the idea that Esau is to be appointed ultimately head of the family. Esau, who has no time for spiritual things, who's not interested, who's only interested in his life out there in the field and his adventures and possibly his lion hunting for all we know and the dangers that he courts. Esau has no time for spiritual things. He's not a religious man. He's not a man of faith. Oh, he may behave himself in the presence of his father, but he's no time for that. You can't do that, says Jacob to himself. You can't make Esau the head of the church. Why, that's what the Anglicans do, isn't it? Who's the head of the church? Most of the time, an archbishop who isn't even a believer. I don't want to stray into that. But says Jacob, you cannot make Esau the head of the family of God's people, the type of the church, the ones who... This is preposterous. It has to be demonstrated just how far from any belief and reverence and respect and interest Esau is. So the day that Esau comes in and says, I am famished, I must have what you're cooking, just serve it to me instantly. Oh, thinks Jacob, this is just an opportunity to demonstrate Esau's indifference to his exalted station, potentially given to him by his father. And so Jacob says in verse 31, sell me this day thy birthright. This is quite a clear demonstration. Verse 32, Esau said, behold, I am at the point to die. Now, you might think he's saying, I am so hungry, I'm about to die. Of what use is my birthright to me? That is actually not what he says. It may be that our translation is a little inelegant, but Esau says something like this. Let me paraphrase. I'm going to die anyway. I could die any time. I court danger. I love it. I'm a hunter. I do things to put myself at risk. I'm going to die, and so what? When I'm dead, I'm dead. I don't believe in those things you hold to. The afterlife, the purposes of God, the future of the family, a great descendant through whom all the nations of the world should be blessed. I live for the here and now. I don't have any truck with this invisible spiritual world that you hold to. So that's more or less what Esau is saying. Behold, I'm at the point to die. I have to die. Death I face all the time. What profit shall this birthright do to me? It's a statement of non-belief. It's a demonstration of that. And Jacob says, verse 33, well, make an oath to that effect. State it clearly. Say, in effect, I am an unbeliever. I think this is total nonsense. I have no faith in a birthright, a future, prophecies of God, or any of those things. And so short on any respect or reverence is Esau. He says, fine, you want the oath, I make the oath. What's the purpose of this? Well, don't you see, Rebekah is going to tell Isaac, my lord, she's going to say, the women treated their husbands of eminence with very great respect, and Isaac had great eminence, and he deserved it. The Philistines in the neighborhood where he was regarded him as God's representative among them, even the Philistines. So godly was his life, and so well maintained was his entire following and retinue. So Rebekah would say, my lord, today something quite awful happened. Esau even swore an oath to his unbelief and his indifference to the prophecy of God. If she did, and I'm sure she did, Esau would have raised his hand. I don't know. You've said enough. And Rebekah withdrew. And Isaac rather thought very deeply about this. He would have been shocked. This is my speculation. I own it. But at the end of the day, he'd have thought, well, men do say things they don't mean. Men do overreach themselves. It is surely Esau, with his gifts and his initiatives and his distinctive character, and the firstborn anyway, who must be the head of the family, even if Jacob is to have the blessing of the seed royal in his offspring. Now I'm going to prove this to you in just a moment. But verse 34, then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, and he did eat and drink, and rose up and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Jacob had got him to state it clearly, his unbelief, his irreverence, his position. That's the correct way to see the event. This is Holy Scripture. These are not just little far-fetched stories of a brother who comes in famished. I'm dying. Feed me. Sell your birthright. I give it to you. That's the most simplistic interpretation imaginable, and it does no justice to what follows. Now let's go on to chapter 27. Chapter 27, verse 1. And it came to pass that when Isaac was old and his eyes were dim so that he could not see, he called Esau his eldest son and said unto him, my son. He's going to give him the great blessing. Isaac is now 137 years of age. I won't take the trouble just now to prove it to you, but that is his age. Oddly enough, he is now the same age as Ishmael, his half-brother, was when he died. Isaac, I should imagine, has been quite ill, and he's a little shaken. And perhaps he thinks he's going to die at the same age as his brother died. Of course, his brother was some 13, 14 years older than him. And so he calls in his infirmity Esau, to extend to him the blessing. Isaac isn't about to die. He lived to 180. He's got another 43 years to go, actually. We can be quite melodramatic, you know. People can think they're on their deathbed or they're dying and so on and collect sympathy and, well, in this case, 40 years to go. However, he was infirm and he was blind at this stage. Verse 2, and he said, behold, now I am old. I know not the day of my death. By the way, I must remind you that Jacob and Esau are how old? 77. Do you think of this picture of them being little boys or youngsters? They're 77. You hear sometimes preachers saying, the two boys are two old boys. They're not youngsters. They're very experienced men. Anyway, behold, now I am old, I know not the day of my death. So, you know the account, I'm sure. Esau is asked to go and to get venison. His eye was still good at 77. And he could shoot very straight and pick off those mountain goats or whatever it was he was collecting. Make me savoury meats. I suppose a solemn passing of a blessing demanded in their culture a meal to go alongside it. Almost everything was done with a meal. Everything solemn, everything important. And then he spells it out at the end of verse 4, that my soul may bless thee before I die. Verse 5, Rebekah heard. Of course she heard. Sly Rebekah, lurking in the shadows, eavesdropping. No, she's the guardian of her husband. That's her role, to take care of him. Of course she's listening to what he promises to give to all and sundry. She's going to be the one who carries out these things. So yes, she hears. Rebekah heard when Isaac spake to Esau his son. Now, what follows is in many ways very sad. It was certainly sad for Jacob and Rebekah, because on the good side, they know that the prophecy of God and the decree of God is that Jacob should get the blessing. And the headship of the church is about to be passed to a renegade and an unbeliever. And this cannot be. And so, in a good cause, for a good objective, they intervene to avert the disaster by craft and lies. They're in a panic. They do something in the interests of truth, but they go about it in the wrong way. But let's be clear, Rebekah doesn't act because of her own favoritism of Jacob and her own selfish ends, as some people suggest. She acts because this is what God has said must be so. And it must be so. The church is at risk. The succession for the seed royal is at risk. Everything is going to be put into the hands, excuse my throat, of irresponsible Esau. This must be averted. But yes, it's not right what they do, what Rebekah and Jacob do. They go about it the wrong way, and God will duly punish them for it, as we shall see very briefly. But they sought the right end. Doesn't excuse the way they did it, but do bear that in mind. They are the believers. Anyway, Jacob is required, I assume you'll remember the account, to get 2 good kids of the goats and bring it in and so on. And there's a problem. Verse 11, Jacob said to Rebekah his mother, behold, Esau my brother is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. My father possibly will feel me, and I shall seem a deceiver, and I shall be cursed and not blessed. So our whole strategy will backfire. They were convinced that Isaac was going to give the full Abrahamic blessing to Esau. Actually, Isaac had no intention of giving the full Abrahamic blessing to Esau. it is fairly certain, I shall prove it in a moment, that Isaac was going to give half the Abrahamic blessing to Esau. A disastrous half, even that was wrong, but he'd convinced himself that Esau was so admirable, he would have the headship of the family. And Jacob would have the promise of blessing for the line of the Redeemer. He was only going, they thought he was going to give it all to Esau. Even half is quite wrong. Very nobly, verse 13, Rebekah says, "Upon me be thy curse. If we're found out, I will take responsibility." She's an old lady. That means she'd be sent away. She'd be cast out of the home for deceiving her husband. Rebekah isn't a horrible, selfish, cunning, scheming person. She's going the wrong way about doing the right thing, but she's still got nobility in her. I will take the ignominy and the punishment if a curse falls. So Jacob went and fetched, and you know what happened. She put the skins of the kids upon his hands and upon the smooth of his neck, and she gave him savoury meat, and he came to his father. And verse 19, the verse of 3 lies, "I am Esau, thy firstborn. I have done as thou badest me. Eat of my venison." The 3 great lies to get into the favour of his father. "How did you find it so quickly?" And he has a smooth answer for that. "Let me feel you. Isaac is suspicious." Why is he suspicious? Why is Isaac suspicious that this could possibly be Jacob? Well, he's had enough arguments with Jacob over this very thing. That's why. Because Jacob, with all politeness, has repeatedly petitioned Isaac and said, "Sir, my father, you cannot do this. You cannot favour Esau. It's a terrible thing for brother to appear to be against brother, but the promise and prophecy of God is clearly that I should have that Abrahamic blessing." And he'd been dismissed from the presence of Isaac, perhaps many times before. My supposition again, I own it. Only that could give rise to suspicion in Isaac. Is this really Esau? Or is it Jacob? And Jacob went near unto Isaac. And there's those remarkable words at the end of verse 22, used to be greatly misused, misapplied by the old preachers, but in a good cause. "The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau." If I can just break the narrative for a moment. This was when somebody was preaching the right things and doing the wrong things. It's not really the meaning of the passage. But where somebody claimed to be a believer in the right things and yet was promoting wrong things. The Puritans had this problem with people who preached the right doctrines but wanted high church sacraments and so on. And they would quote Isaac, "The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau." It's plucked out of context. But what a statement. We can say it today about some of these television celebrity preachers who appear to preach so much right doctrine. Actually, it isn't all right, but they appear to be, they're famous. And all manner of people listen to them. I like so-and-so. I like so-and-so. The internet celebrity Calvinistic preachers. Well, we're Calvinists too. And yet in between their preaching there's crashing rock music. The world is everywhere. And you think of what the old preachers, the old Puritans would have said. The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. They say the right things, but what they do is worldliness and treachery. Be very careful, friends. It is a misuse of the texts, but they're searching words. But anyway, we read that Isaac discerned him not. And so he ate and he proceeded to bless Jacob. He thought it was Esau. Now look at the blessing which he gave him. It's a very strange one. It isn't the full blessing. Verse 28 of chapter 27. Therefore God give thee of the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth and plenty of corn and wine. Let people serve thee and nations bow down to thee. Be Lord over thy brethren and let thy mother's sons bow down to thee. Cursed be every one that curseth thee, and so on. That's just the point. Esau gave him the headship of the family, but he didn't give him the blessing of the one who would bear the seed royal. He didn't do it. Let me turn you back to Genesis 12, just for a moment, and verse 3. You see the great blessing here. I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing, and I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. Now this bit, it's missing. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. Isaac never said that when he thought he was blessing Esau. He left that out. That would be reserved for Jacob anyway. What he was doing was wrong. He shouldn't be giving the headship of the family to Esau, but he didn't give him the seed blessing. He left that completely out. And so I point that out to you. It's repeated in chapter 26 and when God appears to Abraham. In fact, let me turn, we've just time to do this. Look at chapter 22 and verse 17, where you find it again repeated to Abraham. Here it is, that in blessing I will bless thee, in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore. And verse 18, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. There it is again, it's left out of Isaac's blessing to Esau. It's not there. And then in chapter 26 and verses 3 and 4, this is God speaking to Isaac earlier and giving him the blessing. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with thee, and I will bless thee. For unto thee and unto thy seed I will give all these countries, and so on. And then verse 4, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. The seed royal promise. Isaac never gave that to Esau. He never intended to. Rebekah thought he was going to give Esau everything. So did Jacob. He shouldn't have given him even the headship of the family. But then what happened, as you know, is Esau returns. And Isaac realizes that he's blessed Jacob, not Esau. But at the same time, he instantly realizes that God has overruled. He's been deceived, and that was wrong, but God has allowed it to happen. And he's been overruled, and he's been wrong all along. And he begins to shake and shake and shake. Chapter 27, verse 33. And Isaac trembled very exceedingly. The Hebrew says something like very excessively. And said, who? Where is he that hath taken venison? And he wouldn't allow his mind to be changed. When Esau said, bless me, reverse the blessing, bless me also. No, my son, no. I was going to bless you wrongly. The blessing has been stolen from you, but it's right. It should have been. And I am guilty before God. I should never have favored you. I should never have thought I could combine the church and the world in my family and give my favorite older son, who represented the seed of the serpent, the headship of the family of God and the headship of Zion. I should never have done it. and he shook before the Lord, and he held to his guns. That's why in Hebrews we're told, by faith Isaac blessed Esau and Jacob. He always intended to bless Jacob with the seed blessing, and when his wrong move was overthrown, he stood by it. He didn't change it. He realized he was wrong. So faith spoke, and Isaac repented. And then, as it turned out, our time is practically out. As it turned out, he did give the blessing just a shade later, chapter 28, verses 3 and 4, but he gave it to Jacob when he dismissed him. God Almighty bless thee, and make thee fruitful, and multiply thee, that thou mayest be a multitude of people, and give thee the blessing of Abraham to thee, and to thy seed with thee. So the Abrahamic blessing went fully to Jacob. There's so much to be learned from that, isn't there? Oh, humanly speaking, the church and the world are about to be merged. The worldling is going to be made the head of the church. Confusion, the seed of the serpent, will rule over the seed of the woman. And God, as he has repeatedly in previous chapters, separates them out again, divides them. We're seeing it all over again in the churches worldwide today. The world being brought into the church. Confusion, the seed of the serpent, running rampant among the seed of the woman. May God separate us out and call out faithful people and help us to see this vital principle. You can't mix the two. There must always be a separate church. Well, dear friends, Jacob at 77 had to flee. I haven't read the verse, but Esau's reaction to all this was, in modern language, I'll kill him. I will destroy him. I will take his life. The full hostility of the world against the church now emerges. It's always our enemy. It'll always take from us. Even when it smiles upon us, the devil who is behind the world is seeking to destroy us. But it's true, Jacob and Rebekah had gone the wrong way about it. So Jacob at 77 had to flee. He got the blessing, but he didn't get the family for many, many more years. Rebekah paid as well as Jacob. They would never see each other again after this event. Jacob, ironically, would be deceived by his own sons in due course. He would have to enter into hard service for 20 years. He would be further sanctified by the Lord. So don't ever take the lesson, well, Jacob and Rebekah, in a good cause, for the right thing, to achieve the right ends, did wrong. Yes, but when Christian people do wrong, they have to pay for it. The Lord will see to that. So I haven't really touched on it. There's election in the chapters, earthly powers overturned, the elder shall serve the younger. The weak shall be the one who God selects and uses. People constantly are looking for the strong, even in the church. They say to themselves, what we want is the best rappers in the world, the best this in the world, the best that. They will not learn. God uses the gospel and prayer by the power of the Spirit and weak instruments. Isaac slewed his judgment by admiring worldly characteristics in Esau, the elder of the twins. Don't admire worldly things overmuch. If there's something you appreciate it. Don't become besotted with it. It skews your whole Christian tastes and outlook. Separation of the church and the world. All these things are in the passage. But over it all, God brings his purpose to pass in the interests of the church. And so the passage closes. May it be a blessing to us to understand the event correctly.